Hello, everybody, and welcome to another late night episode of Hubris. My name is Jess,
My name is Sleepy Mike.
and today, because I didn't really know what to do for this week's episode, I haven't read that. I've read some good books this week, but I realized that we haven't talked about a whole half a year's worth of books. So what I decided to do today is we're going to look at the books that I've rated as 5-star, and we're going to take a look at the books that we've rated as 1-star. And if we have not talked about them on the podcast, then we are going to talk about them today.
We're going to get the highs and the lows. We're going to get the swishes and the clunkers.
Yes. And I will put a little caveat here, for the exception of one book and the 1-stars, I did not finish the two of the 1-star reads that I had.
Oof.
And I had my reasons for it because it was just really, really bad. So in my personal opinion. So
all right. Well, what do you want to start with? You want to start with a 5-star or you want to start with the 1-star?
I'll let you decide.
Okay, we got 11 5-star books and 3 1-star books. So let's crank out a couple 5-stars.
Okay.
Number 1, Volume 5 of Seventh Time Loop. The villainess enjoys a carefree life married to her worst enemy.
We already talked about that one.
We already talked about that book, but worth stating. Awesome.
I honestly think that entire series is really good. I just enjoyed it from cover to cover.
All right. Book 3 of the Mindfuck series.
Okay, so that
Scarlet Angel.
So that series is a 5-part series that can basically be read as one big book because they continue on. And for me, the first 3 books of this series, that was really just one long book, were great. Like, it was exactly the kind of dark romance that I like. And it was really, really great. And then I think it was at the end of book 4, one of the main male character made a decision, and it just completely ruined the rest of the series for me. Even though it ended pretty good on like the main female's part.
Would you say it was a mindfuck?
No. I just say the male main character really ruined it for me. So the first 3 books, basically the series is about this girl who she meets an FBI agent one day at a coffee shop, and they exchange numbers, and he's like super interested in her, but he's a workaholic and he's trying to solve this serial killer case. Turns out she's a serial killer.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why she's going after the people of this town that she came from is she was brutally raped, her and her brother, by basically the boys of some important men of the town. And because of it, the sons got away, and unfortunately her brother died of his injuries before they could make it to the hospital. So she basically, what she ends up doing is, she was from a poor background, but it just so happened that night another girl came in with severe injuries, and she was like a millionaire or something like that. Like, she was a wealthy girl. So she passed away, and she was able to somehow switch their records so that it looked like she was dead, but she was able to take on the identity of this heiress girl. And she basically took all her money and came up with this elaborate scheme to get back at the people that hurt her. And, in a way, you are pushing for her character to, kind of get her version of justice. It's a little twisted, but I just really enjoyed her character. She also had a best friend who was helping her make these plans. He was like the hacker of the group, and she was kind of the one that going out and doing the actual killing. But her actual relationship with the FBI agent ends up really kind of being genuine for a while. And I thought it was a really good mix of, that golden boy type justice versus that dark type of justice, right? Like there really are, in most people's opinions, two different types, and so it didn't exactly.
So Batman doesn't kill.
Yes.
Sexy Batman.
Well, I'm not saying it's a vigilante justice. It's dark justice. But to some people, you know, killing those who wronged you is a form of justice. Not saying it's a right form of justice. In a lot of, you know, the enemy, that's what he's doing, right? Like
Right.
he's getting revenge on the people who harmed his family or whatever. So this is that type of a book, and I thought it was a really good balance of good and bad. She even at one point questions on whether or not she should continue through with her plan, because she kind of you know, ends up really liking this FBI guy, and then he just totally blew it when he found out her identity. He was just a big asshole about it. So anyways, that's what ruined it for me. But overall, I really enjoyed the read. If you like that kind of like almost like a Hannibal kind of story, right? Like there's the good guy and there's the bad guy. There's no cannibalism in this one, thankfully. But I really enjoyed it. It was really, really good.
Yeah. For my sake, I'm also very thankful. Okay, let's hop over to one of the clunkers.
One of the 1 stars.
Yes, Chain of Gold, The Last Hours, Book 1.
Okay, so this series, so all of Cassandra Clare's books that take place in like the Shadow Hunter type verse, they all connect in some way. So the original ones follow a group of characters, and her secondary books are called The Infernal Devices, and this is
it's that author.
Yes. So The Infernal Devices follows Jem, Tessa, and Will in their story, and it is honestly one of the best love triangles that I have read. It's a love triangle where you actually kind of want them both to end up with the girl, and they do in the end. So it's just a really, really sweet story. And this book, the one that Mark just mentioned that I put as a 1 star, is the story of their children. So here I'm thinking I'm going to love this book because I really, really loved the story of Tessa, Will, and Jem. What I forgot is when I read that book, that series, I was like 18.
Yeah. I was gonna say it's a young book.
Yeah.
It's like when I used to love reading like the Artemis Fowl books, and to be fair, Artemis Fowl, it's like he's like a genius criminal mastermind whole thing. And I went back and I tried reading one of the books, and I was like, oh, this is very like, ooh, this is like appealing to me when I was like really into like N64 GoldenEye. Like,
yeah. So I went into this being like, I can't wait to see some cameos of like my favorite characters from that series and learn about their children. And if I was, you know, maybe even 20 years old, I would maybe have enjoyed this series. But it was so predictable that I was like, I don't even want to finish reading this because I know how it's going to end. And so I was maybe 30% into this book, okay? And I messaged a friend of mine who had read the book, and I basically was like, this is what I think is going to happen. And she, in very few words, confirmed that I was 100% correct. She's like, how did you know that? And I'm like, because it's so predictable. So at this point, I'm like, there's no point in me reading this book because I know exactly how it's going to end from like the first few chapters. Like that is, I'm sorry, if you're 18, maybe you haven't read as much as I have, maybe it wouldn't be as predictable to you. But I'm like, this is just not a good book in my opinion. Like there has to be something that like is left, like you can predict what's going to happen, but it can't be so predictable that you're basically turning the page and they're like, yeah, I knew that this was going to happen on the next page.
Yeah.
So that is why it was a 1-star read for me. I did not finish reading it because again, I figured
well, in a way you did, because your brain worked out the rest of the plot.
My brain did. I didn't even have to read the book to.
Yeah, I mean, let's just gonna play devil's advocate here. Okay, you read more books in a month than most people do in their life.
Yes.
So I think probably what's happened is this book is written for and designed for a teenage audience.
Absolutely.
And their exposure to novels is this might be the first.
Yeah, and absolutely, and that's what I mean. Like, if I was younger, I think I would have enjoyed this series much better. But it was just, it,
This is one of, like, you know what I think part of it is? I think nowadays so many things are tropes,
yes,
but we have been so exposed to those tropes that now the trope is that people are aware of tropes and write outside of them. But the tropes are there for a reason. Like, this is just a book that follows a very clear, like, defined, well adjusted plot
yes,
that is very predictable. But there was a time when that wasn't predictable.
absolutely. And like, the other thing that I do want to say too is Cassandra Clare does have a very specific writing style. So she does mostly format her books as like 3 to 5 books each, kind of grouping of the books. And the Shadowverse is very, there's a lot of lore there. She's a talented writer, but I also just have read enough of her books as well that it made my writing, like her writing, predictable to me as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, so, a 1 star, but mostly on the merits of the fact that it's a juvenile book.
Yes.
And that might be fine for some people.
Yes.
How about jumping back to the swish? Whoosh, 3-pointer. Let's see it. None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell.
All right. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I listened to the audiobook version of this, and I think the audiobook is what completely sold me on this book. The premise of the book is there's these 2 women. They both just so happen to share a birthday, and they meet each other by both being at a restaurant at the same time celebrating their birthday, and they live very different lives. But the one who lives the quote-unquote less successful life approaches the one who lives the more successful life, and she's like, you run a podcast, right? And she's like, yeah. She's like, well, why don't we do this podcast where like we talk about how we were both born on the same day in the same hospital, and like how our lives have like separated. So part of it is a podcast. And so when you're listening to the recordings of the podcast, it changes the tone to sound a little bit more like recorded. So it's a very immersive thing. So it almost feels like you're listening to something within listening to something. So I really liked that. It was really well edited, in my opinion. And the story was just really great. It is a thriller, and it does have some murders in it. It has some honestly, I almost don't even want to talk about it, because it's like I did not necessarily see everything as it was coming, and that is a big thing for me.
You know what? This is so. There's something in video games where if you have what's called a linear style game, like a linear story based game, this is kind of like that. Like, there's some books that you can pick up and read and reread, and you can enjoy them every time. And there's some video games that you can pick them up and play and play and play, and they have that repeat value. But then there are other games and other books where you can only experience them once.
Yes.
It's like when I played Outer Wilds.
Yeah.
You can only play listener, I'm gonna hop in here. If you like video games and you have not played Outer Wilds, play that game. Don't look up a single thing about it. It will blow your mind. Once you play that game, it's done. It's like Undertale. Once you play Undertale and you beat Undertale, you can replay it. But the magic is in that first playthrough where you will have the memories. It's a magical experience, but you get it once.
Yeah. Yeah, and the one of the characters, she's just so twisted, and the ending of it left me feeling so conflicted. And I left that book, and that book has like stayed with me, and that is why it is a 5-star read, because even though it is not the best book I've ever read in my life, it it stuck with me, and it made me question, things that I thought I had figured out during the book. It was just really well written. Alice Feeney's books have done that for me as well. I don't think I've read any of her books this year. I read the majority of them last year, which is why they're not there. But that is what I love from a thriller. I don't like too much gore. I don't like too much, you know, it's the husband type character, like I really do love a book that really makes me question whether or not what I've read is actually what's happened, like is it the main character is an unreliable narrator and you have to like fill the pieces yourself, like that's what I love from a true thriller. And that's what I like about it. So this was just a really, really good read. Highly, highly recommend it if you do like that genre, specifically the audiobook. It was just a really good immersive experience, and I just really loved the style of the writing and everything.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So would totally recommend to read that book.
Jumping straight back into the clunkers, The Nature of Witches.
So I had read another book from this author. And so this was the second book from the author that I had read, and it just started, and I think I got like a good 30% in, because my general rule of thumb is if I'm 15% into a book and I'm not liking it, I start to question whether or not I should keep going. And I've come to the conclusion that about 15% in an average size book, so something that is between 8 to 12 hours, 15% is a pretty good judge of whether or not I'm gonna like the book. But this book, I was like, do you know what, I really want to give it a solid chance. So even at the 15% mark, when I didn't love it, I kept going, and it just, there was nothing that made me want to keep reading this book. I didn't care about the characters, I didn't care about the magic system, I didn't care about the world, I didn't care about the world building. There was just nothing about it that I was like, this feels like a really great book. So for me, I'm like, by this point, by 30% into the book, I should want to keep going. And I just had zero desire. Like there was nothing hooking me. And so I did stop reading it, and I really, really was disappointed, because I came off of like a really good book. And to me, I like to think that my standards can get pretty low on what I consider a decent read. But there was just nothing that, like, for me personally, that salvaged this book for me. So that is why it was a 1-star read.
Okay.
And I did not finish it.
Well, it's a shame, but the sheer number of books you read, there's got to be some that just don't swing and a miss,
Yeah.
It's nice to know though that at least for the 1-star reads, it's not like this book was awful. The writing was terrible. It's like, well,
it's more just like
didn't connect.
It's more like it just didn't connect with me as a reader, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't connect with somebody else. It's just, it was either too predictable, or there was just no meat to it for me personally to keep going.
Okay, what about this one? The Midnight Library. It says one library, infinite lives, and then there's a cat.
So this book was just. It was one that was recommended to me by somebody. I can't remember who. And
Is this the Demon Cat book?
What?
The Demon Cat one? One with the lady with the cat who's actually a demon? Or is that a different one?
I have no idea what book you're talking about.
You were really enjoying it. You were literally giggling while you were reading it.
Oh, you mean this month?
Yeah.
No, this is not that book.
Okay.
But yeah, get ready for that book. It's called Spookily Yours. You'll hear about it in our
Spooky October
wrap up. But the Midnight Library is again, trigger warning, this book heavily implies and discusses suicide. So if that is not for you, maybe skip this one. But it is basically about a girl who decides to kill herself. And when she does, instead of dying and going wherever we go when we die, she ends up in this library. And I'm pretty sure it's her high school or grade school librarian that she sees as like the quote unquote God figure.
I always knew it. I always knew you were the gatekeeper to hell.
And so she arrives, and what she finds out is that she's basically in like a purgatory. So she's not quite dead yet, but she's not alive. She's in the in-between. And until the clock strikes, goes past midnight, so it's right now at midnight, it's the midnight library. As soon as time starts up again, she has to decide on what she's doing. Is she dying, or is she going to attempt to live a new life? So basically what it is this room is full of books, and every single book is like the kind of like the infinite possibilities of where her life could have gone. So all she has to do is think up of like, you know, I think one of them is like, you know, what if I continued being a professional swimmer or something like that? I can't remember exactly what she was. What would my life have looked like? And so the library takes that book out, gives her the book, and she goes into that life, and then she lives it. And she could be there for an hour. She could be there for a month. And it's until she decides whether or not she wants to stay in that life that would become her new life. And again, she only has until the time starts clocking again in the midnight library for her to decide. So she goes through all these different lives, and it's just so interesting to see that, right? Like we all, I think about like, oh, the what ifs, but this girl is actually able to experience the what ifs, and like goes on like complete random stuff. Like, what if I was, you know, like completely random stuff. So at first she kind of like goes through all of like the biggest regrets, kind of, I would say, and then she kind of like starts having fun with it, and she decides to, you know, live all these other lives. And
yeah, I think it's an allegory for hope, right?
Absolutely.
It's an allegory for
Absolutely. And especially like in the beginning, it's really dark because she's basically like, well, I have no desire to keep looking through these lives, like I want to die. But the more she is kind of talked into experiencing these lives, the more value she sees in life. And you know, if you haven't read it and you want to read it, go ahead, but it ends on a really positive note. And I just really loved the ending. I really loved the message. It was a really good standalone book, which I feel like sometimes with standalone novels, they don't really necessarily leave a lasting impression. Like you might like the characters or whatever, but it's just kind of like, okay, whatever, and then you move on. But this book, the premise, everything, it just really stuck with me. And again, that's what is like a 5-star read to me. It has to stick with me.
That's okay. That's great. We've already talked about Hoarded by the Dragon.
Yes.
We've already talked, which, you know, monster banging book. Gotta give props.
Honestly, for what it was, I loved it. Yeah. Every single page.
Draco Malfoy and the Mortifying Ordeal of Being in Love. That's one of our earlier episodes.
Yes. Listener,
check it out. The real G's in the audience know. Lights Out, another top hitter, dark, funny, sexy.
And I will say that it is probably still my top book of the year so far.
Ooh, so ladies.
Specifically gents, the audiobook.
Get that, check it out. We got one more 5-star, one more clunker. Let's end it off on a 5-star. Let's do the last clunker.
Okay.
King of Battle and Blood.
So this book came across my page as, I believe it was kind of like advertised as like a vampire smutty book. And I'm like, cool. I love me some vampires. Edward Cullen was my original book boyfriend. Let's get into this. And it was just, the plot was bad. The smut was bad. Everything about it was bad. But I kept reading it thinking, okay, it's going to get better. And this was one of my first, like, I'd say, like, TikTok reads that I read, and it just wasn't good, in my opinion. And I went into it with high expectations, and this book made me realize that for some of these, like, book talk type books, I have to lower my expectations.
Yeah, well, I think there's also this interesting thing. I've seen this too in some other communities, like gaming communities and stuff, is like book talk grew from the passion of people who loved books, but it has now been I guess I could say infiltrated. You know, capitalism spreads its fingers into everything, and that's just the society we live in. And I honestly think capitalism is a great system, but I mean, it's got problems.
Everything has its problems.
Its problems, but of all the systems, it's pretty good. But, people recognize that Book Talk is seen as a peer-to-peer recommendation service where you can almost feel like, well, I love books and you love books, and I know the kind of people who are really into books and I trust their opinions.
Yeah.
But then you're going to get people who will capitalize on that and join that community to push books for profit with, you know what I mean? Like, there's going to be, you're going to have times where people are like, wow, you got to check out this amazing new book, but really it's because maybe their friend has the book, or maybe they're a part of a marketing company and they're just doing that, right? It's like, I have to imagine, I've seen this too in gaming, where it's like there is it's not like the pure Book Talk isn't just pure Book Talk anymore. It's Book Talk plus people who have joined it for profit, right? To do book recommendations. Yes. I've seen those TikToks where I'm like, you're not actually a book person. Like, you're really selling this book hard.
Yes. Or, there's some other reason that it keeps coming up. And this is the thing. I've read a bunch of other people's reviews when I've read books before. And, there's some people who agree with me where this is a 1-star read for them versus a 5-star read for somebody else. So, there is always going to be somebody who likes a book. Like, it's not going to get thousands of reads for no reason, like, for the most part. Not all books have thousands of reads, but I'm talking about these books that end up blowing up. So somebody does like them. There is something about it that they like. For me, I just like, listen, I've read a ton of fan fiction, good fan fiction, bad fan fiction that was mediocre. And why I bring up fan fiction is because I like to think of that as like the birth of my smut experience. Okay. Okay. The first
my
bits of
journey
smuts.
into smut.
Yes. So, I have read a lot of different types from fan fiction, and now going into the more published books, if somebody has published a book, I expect personally a certain level of plot and a certain level of editing, and this book was just not it for me. And again, what I didn't realize at the time is a lot of these books are self-published that are on Kindle Unlimited. Not everybody has the budget for big editors and whatnot. So I have become a little bit more forgiving. Because if I look at, some of the Kindle books, like I did some of my fan fictions, I will enjoy it more because my expectations are a little bit lower. However, this book, people were like, the smut is so good, the character's so great. And I'm like, guys, it's not like, and so it was such a disappointment for me. And I was like, really, nothing can save this book. Like, I think there's other books in this series, and I was like, there's no way I'm reading them. Like, this book is so bad. So just not for me. Again, not my cup of tea.
Yeah. And again, I think it's also like a consequence of the fact that you've ingested, and I use that word specifically, you have consumed a copious amount of fan fiction. And I will say the one thing about fan fiction that is, fan fiction is it's kind of like you're playing like blackjack or something. Like, you can get dealt a hand and you're like, how is this not the best selling book ever? Like Manacled. Manacled. It's like you read a fan fiction, you're like, this is longer than most books and way better written and way better, like, grammatically correct. It's and I said that sentence with terrible grammar, and then you will read other fan fiction and it's like, and then the dog was there, and you're like, oh boy, a child wrote this. And that's
sometimes it is like a 13-year-old who's writing this stuff,
and that's the beauty of it. But like you said, you kind of have higher expectations when you go to what was traditional published media. And I say that with air quotes because nowadays with self-publishing, you're basically you can just get fan fiction and self-publish it, and that's a beautiful thing. But you can't look at it with the same lens that you would view like traditional print publishing, right? It does have a different, you can tell immediately, like, it reads differently. Yeah,
but even to play devil's advocate to that point, there are professionally published books that have spelling mistakes that are trash. Like, you get it no matter what you're getting into. But I will say that I am a little bit more forgiving now with the self-published authors. And I actually recently read somewhere somebody commenting saying that they were upset. I think it was a self-published author, that a bunch of people were rating their books with 3 stars, and they thought 3 stars was a bad rating. And I was like, 3 stars is my average rating. If I have enjoyed a book but it didn't wow me, it didn't stick with me after I read it, it's a 3-star read.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
people are coming at it with an Amazon lens, where if it isn't 4.5 or 5 stars, it's garbage.
But do you know what? But that's not a good representation of,
no, it's bad.
of a rating system. I am not going to give a book that was an enjoyable read while I read it, but nothing that wowed me, nothing that really stood out, with higher than a 3 or a 3.5. A 3 through 3.5 is probably my biggest rating
Jess,
that I get.
You produce a beautiful Gaussian distribution. I'm so proud. It is, like, I'm a reader. I'm being completely honest. It's beautiful. It's like it's like
perfect curve.
It's perfect. It's just like, I don't even know, because it's like you didn't plan it.
No.
You just were like, yeah. Most of my reads are 3 stars. Some of my reads are 4 and 2. A handful are 1 and 5, and it's like perfect. Yeah. Blows my mind.
Yeah. So for me, like, a 5-star read, and again, doesn't necessarily mean it's the best book ever published. It doesn't mean that the 1-star reads are the worst books ever published. It's just my personal opinion. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Last 5-star.
Yes.
The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue.
No surprise here. One of the main characters is basically death.
Oh,
okay.
Here we go. Bonus points already.
Bonus points already. So, this book.
Does he have wings?
I don't think so.
Is he described as being like ripped?
Does
he have a leather jacket?
I don't know. Okay. So, this book is about this girl named Addie LaRue. She basically was from like the 17 or 1800s. Can't remember her decade, but a couple hundred years ago or something like that. And she was basically from a small town, destined to marry this guy, and she just didn't want to marry him. She was like, I don't want this life. But her parents are encouraging her to do it, and she's stuck. She feels stuck. And so she's literally supposed to be on her way to the wedding, and she basically runs away. I think she like gets out of a window and runs away. And what ends up happening is she's running like through the forest, and I think she like calls upon the gods or something like that. And basically one answers her, and she makes a deal with them, basically saying, I want to like live my life. I want to I don't want to be bound by anybody. Like, I don't want to be like held back by anything. I just want to live my life to the fullest, and I want to live until I'm done living. And so the god agrees. But what ends up happening is no boundaries, no, like, basically pure freedom. Everybody forgets her. She has no ties to anybody.
Right.
Okay.
Monkey's paw.
Yes.
Love a good monkey's paw.
So that is the caveat. So basically, if she's in a room with you and she sees you, if you're in a room with her and you see her, you can interact with her and talk with her. But as soon as she gets out of your eye of sight, like you leave a room and you come back, you forget her. So she goes to her, the people that she knew and whatnot, and she's basically on the run. And the first few years, she basically lives in squalor.
Okay. So I guess my question then is, when they look back at her, is it like they're seeing her for the first time, or do they remember who she is only when they look at her?
Nope. So when they see her, it's like the first time they've ever met her. And if they leave the room and come back, they're like, oh, who are you?
Got it.
So, and it's not like they remember her the next day.
Just out there freaking robbing ATMs left, right, and center.
So basically, like, what she ends up doing is she does have like some relationships, but she has to reintroduce herself every single day. Mm-hmm. So she may spend an entire day with a person, and then they go to sleep and they forget her, and then she'll like basically run into them again and just keep looping, like kind of like putting herself through this like almost torture by seeing them and being with them. And maybe the person might feel like they have some kind of a connection to her, but they don't ultimately remember her. And so for a number of years she lives a very poor existence because nobody remembers her to hire for a job, and nobody remembers that they hired, like they said at least for her or whatever. So she really has a really hard time for a number of years basically surviving, and she has to learn how to survive in this world. And the god kind of like laughs his way through her. So he follows her journey, and he wants her to die because he's the god of death. He's like, he wants to claim her soul. And she's like, I am gonna spite you and I'm gonna live the fullest life I can. So it's basically them two. And there's almost this like relationship between the two of them, and he, like Death, ends up kind of falling in love with her, but she hates Death, and she just wants to like basically best him. Then one day she walks into a bookstore and she steals a book. She walks out, and the guy follows her, and he's like, hey, you stole that book. And she's like, how do you remember me? And it turns out that this individual has also made a deal with Death. And his deal counteracts her deal. So he is the only person that will ever have memories of her other than Death. And then she has a romantic relationship with that guy. And it's basically a love triangle between these three characters. And it is so good. It is so good. The magic aspect of this world is so cool. And again, the characters just stuck with me afterwards. It did not end in the way that I thought it was going to. Again, it made me think at the end. It just, and it is also Julia Whalen does the audiobook, who is one of my favorite narrators. So it was just all around a great book, great narration for the audiobook. And I just...
Tip to taint. Just a great read.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% recommend.
I love that. And that is a perfect place to end the episode for today.
There we go.
Listener, thank you for tuning in. Did you think for a second a Monday would go? Yeah, I know it's 10 p.m. on Monday, but the episode's coming out. It came out on Monday, didn't it? I didn't specify a time. You can't hold that against me.
I'm not gonna lie. I forgot that we didn't do a Monday episode.
I didn't. Weekend. I woke up this morning determined. I woke up this morning, my God-given right to report a podcast.
Jesus. All right.
Oh, and with that, I am getting delirious, and my throat's starting to hurt a little bit because I think I might be getting sick.
I think our whole family's getting sick.
Beauty of having a child. Sweet angels, just full of beans and full of viruses.
She's full of snot right now.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, listener, thank you so much. Hit us a like. I don't even know if Spotify has likes. A thumbs up. I truly don't know. Subscribe. That would be awesome. Check us out on YouTube. I think there's like 10 episodes out. I got to approve the other 9. And Google Podcasts, I think that got discontinued, but I think we're on it. And yeah, but mostly just Spotify. So thank you for listening. We'll catch you next Monday. And Jess, hit us with that classic outro you do every time.
Hi to our 2 friends that actually listen to this podcast.
Fuck yeah, you got it, Scott. You were the realist.